What's up gamers, DreamcastGuy here, talking today about Final Fantasy, because as many of you know, this is my favorite series of all time. I've actually managed to track down and beat all the games, the franchise is fantastic, and even in my background I keep my complete in-box copy of the original game. But I want to do something that a lot of you have suggested, which is that on the screen here, you can see that I have a tier list. This is one of those websites where it lets you rank stuff, and I've noticed that in the comments, a lot of people over the course of the last couple weeks have been saying, DreamcastGuy, please rank your very favorites to say what is the best of the best. And today, I'm going to attempt to do that. Now, I'm sure what you have immediately noticed is that this is a pretty complete list, but it is missing a couple things, because honestly, if I put everything, including the super garbage cell phone games and a couple of the Japanese spin-offs, we would be here for 10 years. But I want to try and get to a lot of the major stuff. First and foremost, let's start off with definitely what's most important, which is the main set, the original 15 of them. Alright, so starting off, okay, so I consider Final Fantasy I, the game that started it all, as S tier. It's super good. I actually think that the leveling system is aged superbly, and it's just one of those games that plays really great now. Alright, now immediately we're going to be running into a little bit of controversy. Anybody who's ever actually tried Final Fantasy II is going to know this is not going to be pretty. Final Fantasy II gets a D. Mostly because the leveling system in Final Fantasy II is garbage. I'm not going to quite give it an F, but it's definitely one of those games that, although I've beaten it once, I would not want to beat it again. Alright. Final Fantasy III. Final Fantasy III is one of those games that I played, obviously, when we first got it in like 2006 on the DS. This cover here is the cover I first saw. I'm going to give that... oh gosh, that's tough. I'm going to give that one an A. I think that the game in general is nice. I think the remake they did of it, which is the one I played, was really good. I like the art of it. Honestly, I like the monster design, and the whole big bad Cloud of Darkness was a nice touch. Alright, Final Fantasy IV. This is the game where I think the series first started to really come into form. It really started to understand itself. It had character deaths, it had big plot twists. It was the first game that I think was fully Final Fantasy. I'm going to give that one an S as well. I'm so close to wanting to give it an S+, but I want to reserve that for the truly legendary games, because if I start giving that one S+, I'm going to put all of them up here. Okay, now we're on to Final Fantasy V. This is one of the games that a lot of people sort of forget about. Final Fantasy V was certainly more unconventional. It was very grindy. We didn't even get it here until like the late 90s on PlayStation. I was fortunate enough to play it though, and it's pretty darn good. I'm going to give that one a B. It's fun. I would definitely beat it again right now if I had to. And honestly, I like the way that the characters look. I think the general aesthetic of it is cool. I like, it's grindy, and honestly, I like the job system implementation in there. We're going to be talking a lot more about jobs, because obviously we have Final Fantasy Tactics and the other Tactics games on here, which are fantastic. Alright, Final Fantasy VI. Now, something I've definitely noticed is that over time there's been this new group that's sort of risen up that says that Final Fantasy VI is the best of the entire franchise. I don't think that it's quite that, but I gotta give it an S+ ranking. Final Fantasy VI is dark, it's got steampunk, it's got an evil villain who's literally chaos incarnate. I love Final Fantasy VI. Minute by minute, point by point, that is a masterpiece of 16-bit RPG. It's one of those games that still kind of impresses me because I can't believe that a bunch of dudes just sat down in a room and freaking made that so long ago. This definitely goes as well with Final Fantasy VII. Alright, I gotta put that number one. That is my favorite game ever made. I have to give it an S+. I mean, It's freaking 7. Now, some people like to try and hate on Final Fantasy VII and say it's overhyped. In my opinion, we owe everything to 7. Honestly, I think that 7 selling so well was a big reason that the PlayStation was successful. It's definitely what kickstarted but basically a lot of this mainstream 3D art we see now. A lot of stuff all is based on Final Fantasy VII. I genuinely believe that a big part of the series and how RPGs turned out in general is because of that Cloud and his Mako Reactor adventures. Alright, moving on to 8. Where do I put 8? Final Fantasy VIII is good. I'm really excited because we're about to get the remaster of it. But it definitely has some plot holes. I like Final Fantasy VIII a lot though. It honestly has some of my favorite card systems. I'm gonna have to give it an S. I really like Final Fantasy VIII. I also like the fact that the way you upgrade your guns, like the way you upgrade your weaponry by finding magazines and stuff, it's one of those systems that I feel like is very underrated. More people just do not give that enough credit, and that's part of the reason I'm really excited for the remaster is more people are going to have to give a second look at a game that absolutely deserves a second look. Alright, now on to Final Fantasy IX. If there's one question I see a bunch since I am a Final Fantasy fan is a lot of people tell me which do I think is the best? Like which one do I think is objectively the one that perhaps has aged the most finely? And I have to say that I do think that Final Fantasy IX is probably the best Final Fantasy. It's not my favorite personally, but I think that Final Fantasy IX has some of the best writing, it definitely has one of the most interesting worlds, and it's definitely one of the most philosophical of all of them. It was definitely the first time in my life when I was playing a game and I actually started to consider the concepts of war and vengeance and when exactly you should stop chasing your dreams. I really respect that game a lot, and even now I kind of want to play through it again, even though I just beat it a couple months ago back in February. Alright, now on to Final Fantasy X. Now, to some people, they think that this is the most groundbreaking of the Final Fantasies because it was honestly gorgeous, but it was also the first game on a DVD disc, which means it had a lot of voice acting, it had more complex music arrangements. I'm gonna give it, though, I think that Final Fantasy X is the most approachable, and for that, I really respect it. I do think that it is a touch below certain other games in the series, though. I am going to give it an S. I think that with Blitzball, it has its own sports system. It has a lot of stuff in it that's nice. I also, honestly, I really do like the last boss, Sin. I like the idea of, very few RPGs do it, but I like where you get a chance to see the main enemy right at the beginning, and then you spend the entire story chasing them. That's a dynamic that just doesn't work very well unless you just manage to craft your plot perfectly, and that game totally did. Alright, now Final Fantasy XI is a tough one to talk about because there are like a million expansions, actually, so I've even been trying to collect them as a joke lately. There are so many of these. Final Fantasy XI is an MMORPG that had all sorts of different reinventions and reboots practically with each of its different big giant updates. So just trying to place it on this list, oh god, I'm going to give it a B. Now, a B is still a very good rating. The only reason I'm really even putting it that low is because while it was groundbreaking and certainly managed to make millions of people happy, it just feels like a really giant leap away from standard Final Fantasy, which to me definitely kind of waters down the magic of it, to me, as a Final Fantasy fan. Alright, now we gotta talk about Final Fantasy XII. I've actually seen some people recently hating on Final Fantasy XII as it's re-entered the limelight with the big re-release of the Zodiac Age, which is like a remaster with some new mechanics. Some people have actually been kind of hating on it, which honestly blows my mind. I'll be honest, I love Final Fantasy XII. I've played it a lot. Something I think just doesn't get admired enough or really reflected on quite enough is the fact that Final Fantasy XII does not have a main character. There's lots of main characters, but there's not a singular protagonist. Pretty much anybody you want can be the leading man, And I feel like that is something that is very, very groundbreaking. It was fun to see at the time, and going through it again recently, I especially managed to just kind of step back and acknowledge that that was a very arduous task that they actually managed to pull off very, very smoothly. So I'm going to be giving that one an S. Now where's 12? 12 is right here. Alright, time for one that might give me some hate. Please don't give me a dislike. Hit that like button. I'm going to give Final Fantasy XIII a C. Now, the reason why is Final Fantasy XIII is a rough game. We're going to be talking about the sequels in a second, but Final Fantasy XIII itself is just not fun. The biggest thing is, A, of course it's a giant hallway, but B, I don't like that it sort of discouraged grinding. Other Final Fantasies are all about leveling up and the quest and the art of the adventure. 13 was the first game that felt like it was in a hurry to try and finish itself, and to me, that was an issue. Alright, now we're going to be talking about Final Fantasy XIV. This is another MMORPG, but the original version of it, for some reason, they decided to separate on this list. I gotta give it an F. The launch version of Final Fantasy XIV was a dumpster fire of just catastrophic proportions, to the point in which they've now done a documentary actually detailing just how bad it was and how internally Square Enix was afraid that this game was so bad it might kill the brand, and yes, I'm being serious. Looking back on it now, I think it definitely deserved the hate it got. But I do want to just immediately follow up with Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn. They did what is essentially is a complete rework. They went in and fundamentally redid every piece of the game. The classes, the combat, the way it integrated with consoles. They managed to do it all again and way, way better. I'm going to give A Realm Reborn an S. It has some of the best writing, some of the best expansions, and it definitely earns its fee. It's one of those games you have to pay $15 a month to play, and I'm probably never going to cancel my subscription because I dig that game a lot. Alright, now we're going to be talking about Final Fantasy XV, the most controversial of all. I actually enjoy Final Fantasy XV a lot. I've put almost 200 hours into it now, including each of its expansions and the online multiplayer. I am aware of the fact that it has issues, though. I'm going to give it a B. Now, the reason I'm giving it a B is that Final Fantasy XV is good. In my opinion, it is a very great game. It sets a bunch of goals and it follows through with them. And also, I think that the characters are unique. I like the fact that Final Fantasy XV is kind of boy band road trip, but it also manages to tell something very, very inverse. I like that the bad guy is kind of a good guy as well. The story of Arden is almost as interesting as Noctis himself, and while the game is not as long as I would like and the side quests are kind of weird, I think that it's definitely a game that I'm probably going to do a couple more New Game Pluses on, which is a testament to its ability. We have now completed the mainline Final Fantasies, the ones that are predominantly considered the important entries, and now we're into the spin-offs. This stuff is when things get far more bizarre. Now, I want to start off with the games that I think are trash, because for the most part there's been a lot of love on this list. I mean, let's be clear, for the most part this is a series that is just fantastic wall to wall. Now, the first game that I gotta give an absolute F to is definitely these crappy cell phone games. I don't care about cell phone games. These freaking things suck. Now, where's the other one? Oh god, so these are the DS games. The DS games are pretty good. I'm putting all this stuff down here. I heard that Brave Exvius is pretty decent. I don't care. This stuff, not my cup of tea. I'm personally putting it down there because I don't like mobile games. That stuff sucks. But if we're going to the other side of the coin of spin-offs that I think are actually very, very impressive, let's talk about Crisis Core! So Crisis Core was actually a prequel spin-off to Final Fantasy VII that is very, very dark and almost kind of macabre because it tells a piece of history of that universe that, well, you can't really slip some jokes into. It's dark, but I think it's very, very important. I'm going to give that one... I'm I'm going to give that one an A, only because I do think that the materia system isn't super great and the dodging is a little bit overpowered. Alright, now let's go into the two rhythm games. There's Theater Rhythm and Theater Rhythm 2. These are basically your musical Final Fantasy games. Both of these are cool, but I don't know. I'm not a super big music game fan. I'm going to put those both at the B tier. They're great. Definitely buy them. Not exactly for me, though. Alright, so now we have the three Dissidias. Yeah, I bet you don't even know there were three. So this is Dissidia. This is the original Dissidia. That's the Final Fantasy fighting game. I dig these games a lot, and they're actually a little bit different. I'm going to give the original Dissidia a B. I'm giving Dissidia Duodecim 012. I'm giving that one an A because I think that it added this cool giant like story mode thing that I think was pretty darn impressive. It had open world maps and they added in extra characters from later games. It's crazy. It's definitely a sequel. Some people try and call it like an expansion or DLC. It's definitely a sequel. But the third game, Dissidia NT, which came out last year, that one I gotta give a C. It's just way slower. It's not nearly as refined. It's not terrible. I wouldn't call it a dumpster fire, but it's just not nearly the caliber of the previous games. Okay, wait a minute. Do we have two Crisis Cores? Before Crisis. Okay, well I read that wrong. Okay, so Before Crisis, I'm still giving an A. I like Before Crisis, and there's Crisis Core. So just pretend my earlier speech about Crisis Core was about this. Okay, now let's talk about, let's go into the full trilogy of, oh wait, this is the Final Fantasy 15 DLC. All right, we're going to put the Final Fantasy 15 DLC as a C. I was just going through the list here for a second, and I realized that I actually missed one of the absolute garbage freaking games. How about that? This is another one of the stupid cell phone games. That's All the Bravest. I hate these games a lot. Just, the cell phone games are not my cup of tea. Maybe I'm misreading this thing because honestly the font is so tiny, but these cell phone games do not need to exist. Final Fantasy is about giant, epic journeys that span the globe and save the universe. And this stuff is not that. Alright, now getting back to the main spin-offs, let's talk about the two Final Fantasy XIII sequels. The first one we got was Final Fantasy XIII 2. 13 2 is a big step over the original. I'm actually going to give that one an A. It sort of just managed to make a lot of stuff have more weight. Combat made more sense. A lot of the stuff like the crafting mechanics and stuff, all of it was much more refined. It seemed like the first game was kind of a mistake and they tried to backtrack on it. Now, for the third game, Lightning Returns, which is 13.3, I'm going to give that one a B. It's good. It's actually really good, but it's not quite as good as 13.2, but it is a step above the original 13. This should not have been a trilogy. I know that's controversial. I do not like the fact that there is a trilogy of these games. Alright, now let's talk about a good trilogy, which is Final Fantasy Tactics. So we have Tactics, Tactics Advanced, and Tactics A2. In my personal opinion, these are definitely the most impressive of the spin-offs, like the mainline spin-offs that people talk about, because for the most part, they stand so perfectly on their own. I mean, if you actually didn't put Final Fantasy in the title, these still would have been giant bestsellers, which I feel like is the thing, is if you can actually have a spin-off sell without the branding, that's kind of a testament to just how spectacular it is. Oh, man, where do I put these, though? Where do I put these? So I'm going to give Final Fantasy Tactics an S. I'm going to give Tactics Advance definitely an S. But I'm going to put Tactics Advanced A2. Oh, where do I want to go? I'm going to give that one an S as well. I like the story the most in Tactics Advance. They definitely streamlined a lot of the law system, which is like there's like a combat system with these like debuffs if you break certain rules. They streamlined that a lot in the sequel. I kind of want to move that up. I'll keep that right there. Okay. Let's do another controversial one. I hate Final Fantasy Type 0. Final Fantasy Type 0 is a D to me. It is not cool. I think the stupid squad doing missions, Maybe it's that I'm an old man. Maybe it's that I'm an old man. I have no idea. But whenever there's like storylines that take place in high school and it's not Persona, it is very weird to me. I have a lot of trouble trying to relate with the characters, and a lot of that drama and stuff is just, I don't really dig it. And that game felt like it had too much of it. Now, a game that does have drama, but does it well, is definitely this one. Okay, so a lot of people hate this game. A lot of people think that Dirge of Cerberus is perhaps the worst spin-off or the worst direct sequel in the series. I kind of dig it. I'm going to give that one a B. A third-person shooter in the Final Fantasy universe is not automatically a dead idea on me. Alright, so now we have all of the really, really weird Crystal Chronicles games. All the Crystal Chronicles games are pretty much the same. They just introduce more mechanics. These are the hack and slash like co-op games where you're actually teaming up with your buddies and kind of exploring different cool universes. The original Crystal Chronicles, definitely an S. The sequels, I'm gonna, let's see. I like Crystal Bears. I think I'm gonna give, I do not like that one. There's so many of them. That's kind of my problem, is that Ring of Fates is good. There were a lot of them that came out, and after a while, they very much blurred together. But I can still admire the series of them, the sub-series of Final Fantasy, for what it was. Final Fantasy Adventure, I like a lot. I actually played through that again recently. I'll give that one an A. Final Fantasy Explorers. This was a total Monster Hunter ripoff. I mean, they weren't even really shy about it, but I'm going to give that one a solid C, which is like a 70 in my opinion, a 7 out of 10. Still great. Now, here was a weird one. The Heroes of Light. A lot of people, if I remember correctly, were kind of hating on this one for a while, and I never really got it. Okay, the cutscenes are kind of weird, and it's a little bit cringy, but it still has that heart of Final Fantasy. I'm going to give it a C. It's one of those games that I would play for fun, but I'm probably not going to go back and play it immediately. So it seems like we're just down to the last couple of games here, and unfortunately, there is yet another freaking entry of the absolute crappy cell phone games, so we'll just put that right there on the Fs. Look at all these Fs we have. Yeah, if you're mad about it, I just don't like cell phone games. I'm not a fan of cell phone games. Now, okay, so let's talk about this. This is a weird one. There was this phase where they were trying to just do a direct sequel to a lot of the Final Fantasies because they sold. It was easy money. So obviously we got 10-2. 10-2 is actually one of those games that I think is underrated. More people should have given it a shot. A lot of people saw it. One of the problems was that 10-2 actually came out right after Charlie's Angels, which was a terrible like action movie with like female heroes during the early 2000s. People kind of hated on the movie, and then this game came out, and for some reason there was like this zeitgeist aligning where a lot of people were kind of assuming that this was like some girl power movement, and they just decided not to buy the game, which is a shame because 10-2 is actually pretty interesting. It has like this like thing called the songstress system where you sort of like dance to unlock new classes, and that sounds cheesy, but it works. And I'm being serious. Go watch some gameplay. I actually did a review of it a while ago. It's good. Okay, now another weird sequel we had was Revenant Wings. This was the sequel to Final Fantasy XII. Very forgettable. It was just one of those entries of being like, hey, we could probably throw out another Final Fantasy, and everything was selling at the DS at this point, so they tossed it out there, and I don't think that was a good move. Mystic Quest. Now, Final Fantasy Mystic Quest was called Final Fantasy USA in the rest of the world because it was considered the easy mode one for Americans. I don't despise this as much as other people do, but it's hard to consider it a great game. I'm gonna give it a D. Now, the reason I'm giving it a D is just because it's not very clever. It's not really trying to do anything. It is certainly a dumbed-down version. Now, the last two games we have here is Final Fantasy XV Pocket Edition, which is a cell phone version of Final Fantasy XV, and of course, World of Final Fantasy. I'm going to give 15 Pocket Edition, I'm going to give it a C. Now, the reason why is I do think that it managed to do some fun combat, and it's still the cutesy characters I like. They completely remade the game with like this chibi art, which is difficult to say the least. But World of Final Fantasy, I'm going to give World Final Fantasy a B. So that is the complete list. There is, of course, some games I didn't put on here that just weren't, they didn't happen to be on this list. This was like a pre-made template. If I had to put something like Chocobo Dungeon on there, I'd probably give that an A. Some of the weirder stuff, like some of the missing cell phone games like G-Bike, that stuff I'd probably give like a B, because even though it is mobile, it's certainly spectacular. Alright, well, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If this happens to get, like, we'll say 2,000 likes, I'll actually do a sequel to this video where we look at all the Resident Evils. And yes, I mean all of them, including Resident Evil Gaiden, because I've beaten it and I actually love it. Thanks so much for watching, gamers. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. But do me the biggest favor of all and keep dreaming. I'm recording this video at like 3 a.m. and I don't even know if this microphone's on. I really hope that this all worked. I've never actually filmed a video like this. Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, you know, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.